I came across a rather interesting looking video on YouTube the other day called "I Went Vegan as a Meat Lover, Here's What Happened." I was obviously intrigued by it and curious to see what happened, so I watched it, and this video gets really interesting, so I want to go through it together and discuss. It was uploaded by a channel called Kwoowk, which I later realized is meant to be a play on the word cook. I had never heard of this channel before, but it has 3.88 million subscribers, so it's clearly a very popular channel. The About section says, "I'm not a chef. I'm Kevin and I like making all sorts of food. I want to show people anyone can cook and have fun with it. I usually focus on nutritious and affordable meals for students, but sometimes I like to explore food around the world. I also love breakfast." He also has 3.8 million followers on TikTok and 1 million on Instagram, so altogether he has close to 10 million followers. So let's get into his I Went Vegan video. The video has 117,000 views, almost 1,000 comments. It starts out with him explaining that he was born in Romania, and it seems like he lives in the Netherlands now. He says Romania has a rich food culture, but one aspect about Romanian cooking is that
almost, if not all, of the dishes contain some form of meat. Cabbage rolls with meat, little meat logs, smoked meat sausages, polenta, topped with meat.
He says growing up with that ingrains in your brain that meat and animal products in general are almost necessary for a dish to be complete. And he says for a long time he believed that. He says he's going to make the switch to a fully plant-based diet for 1 week, claiming he wants to learn, experiment, and immerse himself in the world of cooking and eating vegan food. Right away, I want to address the fact that even though the title of the video says that he went vegan for a week, what he really did more closely resembles adopting a vegan diet or a plant-based diet for a week. In terms of semantics, a lot of vegans would say that he didn't actually go vegan, he just tried a vegan diet. It doesn't honestly bother me that much. I knew what he meant in the title. I did not think he was going to do a full overhaul of all of his products and clothing, etc. But I just wanted to address that point right off the bat. Let's keep going. He said he didn't do much planning for this challenge, which was kind of surprising, but at the same time, he is a seasoned home chef. He has 226 videos of him cooking. So this isn't the same as your average meat eater trying out plant-based cooking for a week. This is someone who really knows his way around the kitchen. I'm assuming he has the basic knowledge, cooking skills, and kitchen confidence to carry him throughout this challenge without really having to plan, which is something that I'd say most people don't have. He goes through his fridge to see what he already has on hand, and to be honest, he has a decent amount of vegan ingredients on hand. He says he would usually have a rice bowl with chicken for lunch, so he wants to try to recreate that using tofu. He says he determined that this is the base layer or level 1 of vegan cooking, but he worries that what he's doing is just removing things he likes from his diet and replacing them, which he isn't sure is the best approach. I think for someone transitioning to a plant-based diet, there's nothing wrong with doing what he's doing. He's basically taking what he knows and what he's comfortable with and making minor tweaks. He then says this.
As I went into this week, I was sure of one thing. I don't want anything to do with those fake meats. I'm sorry, I'm not gonna eat this vegan sausage and pretend that it's actual sausage. It's just not. It doesn't work for me. If it works for you, I'm happy.
I found it interesting that while he said this, he put text on the screen that said that the tofu looks like chicken. And indeed, he had just said he was trying to imitate chicken with his tofu. In my opinion, it's completely understandable that people are drawn to mimicking meat with plant protein. It often provides a taste and texture that we're familiar with, and that our brains are wired from a young age to associate with a filling meal or a protein-filled meal. When making a big transition, familiarity can be comforting.
But I had this strong feeling that I wanted to highlight the natural beauty and flavor of plants, vegetables, legumes, mushrooms, all that good stuff. I felt there was so much to explore and I never thoroughly explored it.
Which I really appreciate. Plants are flavorful and beautiful, and since such a huge argument against vegan diets is that they rely too heavily on processed foods, I'm happy to see someone disproving that by showing another way of doing it. Personally, I don't feel like either way is wrong. I do believe having as many whole plants as possible in our diets is the healthiest and most nutritionally beneficial, but I certainly see the value in processed plant foods for convenience, familiarity, taste and texture preference, protein, etc. One thing about this is that for this person in particular, it is his job to spend most of the week cooking. And any type of cooking where you're using whole ingredients and cooking things from scratch is naturally going to be more time consuming. So because of all of that, I'm taking his comments about mock meats with a grain of salt. He shows the meal that he ends up making. It looks really good, healthy, and filling. This is definitely my boyfriend's type of meal. Tofu, beans, avocado, rice, veggies. There's not really a cohesive theme, which I prefer to have, but it does look like a really hearty meal, and I'm assuming it's very similar to what he normally makes. He does make another comment about the tofu looking like chicken.
This kind of looks chickeny. But it's not, it's tofu, which is fine. I shouldn't try to imitate meat.
Last year, someone pointed out to me that should and shouldn't aren't really helpful words in the English language. Should often stands in as a replacement for shame. It's often a way of shaming ourselves. In this case, Kevin was drawn toward trying to make his tofu look and taste like chicken, which, like I said, is understandable. People like eating chicken for a reason. So if you can kind of distill those reasons and transfer it to something else that doesn't cause a chicken to die, why is that a bad thing? In my opinion, there's no should or shouldn't here. But I do appreciate that he is trying to honor plants as their own amazing thing outside of their resemblance or lack thereof to meat. He then talks about the difficulty of snacking. He recreates his usual afternoon snack using soy yogurt instead of dairy yogurt, which he says is okay but not the same. I don't know, to me this seems like a comparable swap. I know that a lot of plant yogurts leave something to be desired, but when you're eating it in combination with a bunch of other things, I wouldn't think the difference would be that noticeable. Plus soy yogurt would have, I'm assuming, around the same amount of protein as a dairy yogurt, so that's a benefit in terms of a high protein snack. He then interviews a vegan food influencer called Hermann, aka Julius, who talks about how the desire to capture food nostalgia has led to an abundance of fake imitation products, which he thinks is too bad. Julius makes a really good point that many critics of vegan food will say all you can eat are lettuce leaves and broccoli, or all you eat are processed fake meats. He says he believes there's a middle way that people don't really talk about as much. Kevin says he wants to approach the rest of his week with this mentality. But first, he needs to go to the grocery store because so much of what he already has on hand isn't vegan. He shows the products in his fridge and pantry and how many of them aren't vegan. I find it interesting that in this section of the video, he shows a lot of processed food. Protein puddings, protein cookies, protein bars. I found all these items online and looked up their ingredients, and they are all pretty processed and have a lot of ingredients. I just find it interesting that so many people will so heavily criticize vegan diets for being so overly processed, and then dig through their fridges and pantries and pull out things like this. As if eating animal products somehow precludes you from eating any processed food ever. They may not be mock meats or dairy and egg alternatives, but they're still processed nonetheless. It's almost like people are okay with the familiar types of processed foods, but not the unfamiliar ones. It basically sets up this unfair standard that omnivore diets are allowed to have any amount of processed food in them because at least they also have whole animal products in the form of animal flesh and secretions. But vegan diets have to be pure and contain zero processed food in order for people to deem them worthy of consideration. Dependence on processed food is more a symptom of the fast-paced culture and world we live in, where many of us don't have much time or energy to focus on food preparation. It's not really a symptom of or exclusive to the pursuit of a vegan diet. Kevin then goes grocery shopping and he rides his bike to the grocery store. I'm not a bitter American Americans suffering from the inevitable feelings of stagnancy and isolation inextricably linked to living in a car-dependent culture, which makes attempting to travel by any form of transportation other than car feel hostile and unsafe. I'm not bitter at all. He talks about subtracting non-vegan things from his diet versus diversifying and trying new things. I would consider this a healthy mentality, focusing on what you can add and all the new foods you can discover, rather than focusing on the foods that you're cutting out. Disappointingly, he doesn't do a grocery haul or talk about any of the challenges he faced at the grocery store. The grocery part goes by very quickly. It's actually really hard to tell what he got, which I think was a missed opportunity to show what is a pretty important part of plant-based cooking. While he's making dinner, he says this:
I'm of the firm belief that tempeh is better than tofu. The reason I like tempeh much more is mainly because of the texture, but also the flavor is like so much more funky and complex to me.
He cooks the tempeh and gets it nice and crispy. Already in this video, I'm loving that he's showcased 2 different types of super healthy plant proteins and how to cook them. He does a sweet and sour style for the tempeh, and he ends up making it into a kimchi fried rice with tempeh. It looks delicious, and he said he really loved how it came out.
That's just incredible.
He then says this, which I thought was very interesting.
So things were going pretty great. Although I kind of realized that in order to have this approach to plant-based food, that's gonna require like constant effort. Now my job is basically cooking and making these videos, and I still had a pretty rough time having to spend that long in the kitchen every single day. I found that more often than not, to make veggies very exciting, you need to spend time on them, which is not a bad thing, but it's just an observation.
Obviously this is interesting because it's exactly what I was saying before about this being his job and most people's lives not being like his. In terms of him saying to make veggies more exciting, you need to spend a lot of time on them, I think that can be true like in the beginning for plant-based cooking when you're still learning, but also like, don't you eat veggies anyway along with your meat? You know what I mean? In general, I have to say, I really don't understand how cooking plant proteins is that much more time consuming than cooking meat. With tofu and tempeh, you can literally eat them right out of the package. Anything else you do to them is up to you. If you want to coat and fry the tofu, you could, but that's not gonna take any more time than, say, coating and frying chicken. Obviously something like lentils take a long time to cook, but that's more passive cooking time. That's just letting them cook while you can go about and do other things. And most legumes like chickpeas, beans, etc. are readily available, cooked and canned. I just think cooking homemade meals in general takes a lot of time. But I think I'm realizing the assertion that plant-based cooking takes longer comes down to the misconception that vegans only eat vegetables. Either that, or it's just people being like, well, I wouldn't really know what I'd be doing, so it would take me longer. Which, sure, but like you would learn things and then it wouldn't take you as long. He ends up making a lentil soup that looks really good. He then says that one thing he's noticed is that his farts really smell. I feel like there's an ongoing debate about whose farts potentially smell worse between vegans and meat eaters. Share your thoughts below. I feel like I've heard more anecdotal evidence that it's meat eaters. A vegan diet can make a person gassy because of the increase in fiber, especially if the body isn't as used to it. But from everything I've learned and researched, gas is a sign of a healthy digestive system and isn't something that should be like used as an argument against a certain diet. There was a comment that addressed this. The farting is because the bacteria in your digestive system is used to your normal diet. It's not particularly harmful, but when people make drastic changes in their diet, it can result in some digestive issues, but it changes as the microbiome starts to adapt to a new diet. That makes sense to me. But in my opinion, that's also another potential argument for incorporating more mock meats as you make the transition because they're lower in fiber generally than things like legumes. So it can maybe give the body time to adjust as you're making the transition. The next day he goes to a Lebanese restaurant for lunch. He didn't exactly say what he got, but it seems like he got the falafel wrap, so classic vegan option. I'm sure it was really good. It doesn't get much better than authentic Middle Eastern food. He then gets a vegan protein powder that he ordered in the mail. He acknowledges that this is contrary to what he said he wanted to do earlier in the video, but he said it saves him hassle and says he has to be realistic instead of chasing some quote, perfect, unattainable lifestyle. Again, I think he's being a little hard on himself. This idea that a plant-based diet needs to be pure and perfect isn't doing anyone any favors and is a myth that I think we need to dispel. He then goes to dinner with friends. He gets a pasta that really doesn't look good. He says he realizes how difficult it can be to go out to eat with friends, and I really like how he put it.
Like, unless the restaurant puts some specific effort into some true plant-based dishes rather than just seeing it as a special dietary requirement, it's not gonna be the most exciting thing in the world.
Most omnivore restaurants see veganism as just another diet to cater to rather than an opportunity to really get creative and broaden their horizons. The next morning, he makes protein powder pancakes for him and his friends. I'm really not sure why he did this. He says they were, quote, the worst pancakes he's ever made in his life. Nothing sounds worse to me than protein powder pancakes. That's like some weird diet culture shit. That's not to do with veganism. Like, that's on you, bro. Why did you put protein powder? It seems like he used the protein powder as flour. Please don't judge vegan pancakes on how protein powder pancakes turned out. I can just see his friends being like, I had vegan pancakes once and they were disgusting. Correlation does not equal causation here. This was a clear user error, and I can only hope his viewers see it that way as well. For dinner that night, he makes a traditional Romanian dish. I was so happy to see he did this. It's a really powerful exercise for people to recreate or veganize traditional dishes because there is so much emotion wrapped up in family food culture. And I think that ends up being a mental block for people as a reason that they think they could never go vegan. The dish he made, I guess, translates as rub the beans. It was essentially a white bean spread, which looks and sounds absolutely delicious. He said he wanted to create art on a plate with this dish, and he truly did. It looks beautiful. While some of you know that I hate mushrooms, I can put that aside to appreciate the simple beauty of what he made. And I love it because this isn't a dish that most people would consider an entree. Like, there's not an obvious chunk of protein on the plate, but obviously it has plenty of protein with the white beans and lots of good nutrition with all the plant ingredients, and looks delicious to boot. He eats it with bread, which is what I would have done as well. So yeah, this one really inspired me. I actually ended up making a white bean hummus of my own yesterday morning. So yeah, I got influenced by Kwoowk. He then talks about turning to other cultures' approaches to vegan food, specifically dishes that just happen to be vegan and weren't born as a replacement to an animal product-centered dish. He makes Mapo tofu, which he says has flavors that are, quote, interesting for his Eastern European palate. I like that as he's cooking, he talks about all the ingredients, why they're being added, and the experience of eating them. It provides this sort of sensorial experience for the viewer that helps sell what he's cooking. And he may do that in every video, but in this video for sure, I felt like it was a great inclusion. And the dish, again, looked really good. For dinner, he tries a new recipe called charred shallots cooked in freekeh. Freekeh? Is that how you say that word? Freekeh. I'm gonna look up how to pronounce freekeh.
Freekeh.
Freekeh. Okay. Freekeh. This is a recipe by Yotam Ottolenghi, who is a famous British chef and restaurateur. I actually found this recipe on The Guardian, so I will link it in the description. This recipe looked amazing, but also very much a labor of love. I could just imagine someone taking this one part of the video in isolation and being like, see, this is why I could never go vegan. It's too much work. He said something really interesting in this part of the video.
Eating these shallots feels like you're eating a really elegant piece of steak. And I don't mean that at all that it tastes or feels like meat. I mean that psychologically, it's such a main character in the dish. You don't see it as a side, you see it as the thing to enjoy.
Basically what he's saying is not that the shallot is as filling as steak or that it has as much protein as steak, but that it feels as special as he perceives steak to be. And that's a psychological bridge that is important for people to cross in order to change the perception of vegetables. This type of vegan cuisine, really just focusing on one vegetable, is a very elevated style of vegan cooking. It's the philosophy behind restaurants like Dirt Candy and 11 Madison Park in New York. So kudos to him for making that effort and showcasing it so beautifully. The next day he says he's having a busy day and he wanted to make something a bit more quick and easy, so he makes an Indian-inspired coconut chickpea curry. At this point, he seems to have somewhat of a breakthrough about food and where it comes from.
I feel that we're becoming like more detached to where food actually comes from, and we lose that kind of personal relationship with it. It may sound weird, and I'm definitely not the guy who's like advocating for a return to the good old days or anything like that. But in some way, I would love to see a future where we have more respect for our food, and especially towards animal products we may consume.
This is a really nice sentiment, although it can be interpreted in different ways. I obviously feel that respecting an animal comes down to more than just being like, thank you for giving me your life before you eat a burger or a steak. Unfortunately, I think people tailor what respect means to them depending on the situation, especially if it threatens their ability to eat one of their favorite foods. On the last day, he makes a mushroom stew. He says he doesn't really feel relieved that the challenge is over. He says he feels good overall, and then he shares his closing thoughts.
If anything, this experience has definitely shown me that my view of what I can eat is pretty limited, and there's a whole world out there of different dishes that don't rely on animal products that I like.
This is something that we as vegans say a lot about meat eaters and about, our own mentalities if and when we used to eat meat. And it's just so nice to hear a meat eater making this connection. There's this paradoxical phenomenon of where people accuse plant-based diets of being so limited, not realizing they only think that because their own diets are so limited. And so removing animal products would be a huge loss, like there'd barely be anything left. But that's not because plant-based diets are actually limited. It's because your way of thinking about food has been limited for so long. In terms of whether or not he's going to stick with it, this is what he says.
So I'm not gonna be fully vegan for now. My goal is to sometimes step out of my comfort zone and experiment with one of these dishes instead of eating one of my normal everyday meals that require animal products. And slowly, I do want to eat mostly plants. This has been a very good experience for me.
I'm not surprised that he's not going to stick with it. While this did feel like it was more than just a YouTube video for him, it felt like it was something that he had been wanting to do for a long time and more of a personal challenge. At the end of the day, he has almost 4 million subscribers and millions of followers elsewhere, an entire business around traditional food content, and he probably feels like he needs to keep all these people happy. I still feel like this journey for him was a win for the vegan movement to drastically reduce animal suffering. Yes, we need people to go vegan, but for the people who just really don't want to go vegan and maybe never will go vegan, if a majority of these people were to eat way more plants and way less animal products, that would still be incredibly beneficial for animal welfare. Maybe that's me not being a perfect vegan by saying that. Maybe that's me being a reducitarian or a carnist apologist, but what I really think is that's me being realistic. The comments on this video overall were incredibly positive, although I did see a lot of references to negative comments, but I didn't actually see any negative comments, so they must have all been downvoted to the bottom where they belong. A lot of comments about how much this video inspired them, and a lot of people sharing their own similar journeys or how they plan to change their diets in the future, which was really nice to see. I had no idea what to expect when I clicked on this video. I didn't know this guy from Adam. I didn't know if this video was going to be obnoxious, misinformed, but I thought it was a really well-made YouTube video overall. It was engaging and informative and also had this kind of chill and easygoing style to it. Beyond that, he did a really wonderful job of showcasing plant ingredients and plant-based cooking. And although I didn't agree with every philosophy he shared, especially the parts about processed vegan foods, I thought he had some really insightful comments throughout, and it's encouraging to see such a popular food influencer spreading awareness awareness and knowledge around vegan cooking. So those are all my thoughts on Kwoowk's video. Let me know what you thought of it. Did you agree or disagree with my takes? Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Subscribe for more of my videos. Tap the bell to be notified when I upload, and I'll see you again soon. Bye!